The night the storm came to Big Sur, the sea roared against the cliffs like a wounded animal. Rain slammed against the glass walls of Elias Crane's mansion, distorting the ocean beyond into waves of trembling silver. Inside, the billionaire sat alone at a long oak table, a single cup of untouched coffee, cooling beside his hand. He had not spoken to another soul in 212 days. The last voice that had filled these halls had belonged to his wife Lila, and even her echo seemed afraid to stay. He lived now in a rhythm of silence, the kind that hums like electricity behind the walls. The house on the cliff was famous in Silicon Valley, a monument of glass and steel designed to disappear into fog. It was also a tomb for a man who could not forgive himself. Every morning, Elias read the same unread email drafts to his late wife. Every night, he played her unfinished piano piece, never making it to the final chord. The world thought he was grieving. He knew he was simply hiding. When the storm hit its peak, the power flickered, plunging the mansion into near darkness. Lightning carved white veins across the sky. Then came the sound, a single hesitant ring of the doorbell. Elias froze. No one ever came here. Not delivery men, not reporters, not even ghosts, he sometimes thought. The bell rang again, softer this time, followed by the muffled sound of knuckles against metal. He rose from his chair, slowly each step, echoing through the hollow house. When he opened the door, wind and rain exploded inside, drenching the marble floor. A young woman stood there, soaked to the bone, her hair plastered to her face. She held a folded envelope against her chest, like it was her only protection. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but with something more fragile, hope. "Mr. Crane," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "I'm sorry to come this late. I saw your posting for house help. I thought maybe—" She stopped, her words lost to thunder. Elias studied her for a moment that felt far too long. She couldn't have been more than 22. Her coat was 2 sizes too big. Her sneakers muddy, her knuckles red from cold. She looked like someone who had run out of places to go. "Do you even know what this job is?" He asked, his tone sharper than intended. She hesitated, blinking through the rain. "I've never done this before," she whispered, "but I can learn." He should have closed the door. That would have been the reasonable thing to do. He had built his life around walls, gates, passwords, and NDAs, yet something about her, the way her voice broke slightly on the word before, or how she didn't step closer, as if she understood boundaries, instinctively made him pause. "You're soaked," he said finally. "You'll ruin the floor." "I'll clean it," she replied without missing a beat. Her directness startled him. He stepped aside. "Come in." She crossed the threshold, slowly dripping water onto the stone tiles. The mansion swallowed her presence like a shadow into its belly. Elias shut the door, cutting off the wind, and for the first time in months, the silence inside shifted. He motioned toward the fireplace. "You can dry off there." She nodded, shivering. "Thank you, Mr. Crane." "Elias," he corrected quietly. "If you're going to work here, you'll have to call me that." She smiled faintly, a flash of something alive against the grayness of the night. He went to fetch a towel, returning to find her staring at the photographs on the wall. Black and white images of the ocean, of a woman painting at sunrise, her face half turned to the light. "Your wife?" she asked softly. He stopped. The question was innocent, but his body reacted as if she had touched a scar. "Yes," he said, voice flat. "She's gone. I'm sorry." "Don't be." He handed her the towel, their fingers brushing briefly. Her hands were cold, and he felt the shock of warmth travel up his arm. He pulled back too quickly. "What's your name?" he asked, regaining composure. "Mara Linwood." "Mara," he repeated, tasting the syllables. "Where are you from?" "Oregon." "Portland." "And you came all the way here for this job?" "I needed to leave," she said simply. "Sometimes you just start over somewhere. No one knows your story." Her honesty disarmed him. He had once said the same thing when he bought this house. He gestured toward the living area. "You can stay in the guest room tonight. We'll talk about the job in the morning." She looked up, hesitant. "You don't even know if I'm any good. You said you'd learn." He turned away, half a smile ghosting his lips. Besides, this place could use a little life again. Lightning flashed, illuminating the glass walls. For a moment she looked around, eyes widening at the endless view of the Pacific. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "It's empty," he corrected. "There's a difference." She didn't answer. The storm pressed harder against the house, but the sound felt distant now. Elias watched her from the corner of his eye as she walked toward the fireplace, kneeling to warm her hands. Her reflection shimmered on the glass walls, fragile, almost unreal. Something in him, something long dormant, stirred faintly like a heartbeat remembered. When she finally turned to him, eyes bright in the dim light, he realized he was still holding his breath. "Thank you for letting me in," she said. "Most people would have turned me away." "Most people don't come knocking during a storm," he replied. "Then maybe you're not most people." He said nothing. Outside, thunder rolled again, but inside, the air was softer. Elias didn't yet know that this stranger, standing barefoot on his marble floor, would unmake the silence he had built his life around. He only knew that as he closed the door behind her, the sound of the storm no longer seemed quite so loud. Morning came slow to the house on the cliff. The clouds still hung low, smothering the Pacific in gray, and the smell of salt drifted through every open crack. Elias woke early, as he always did, before the light could remind him how empty mornings had become. Downstairs he heard faint sounds, the rhythm of movement, a cupboard opening, the brush of fabric against marble. Mara had started working before dawn. She moved like someone afraid to be seen, but determined to be useful. He watched her from the top of the stairs. She was kneeling by the window, wiping salt from the glass in small, patient circles. The light caught her hair, still damp from the night before. He noticed she wore the same clothes, but her sleeves were rolled neatly. Her focus absolute. She reminded him of the interns he once hired at Lunaris, quiet, but full of desperate purpose. He turned away before she could sense him watching. The cameras were easier. From his office, he could see every corner of the house on a grid of screens. He told himself it was habit security, yet his eyes always drifted toward the same image, the living room camera where she swept or dusted or paused to stare at the horizon. She never used her phone, never listened to music, never hummed. Only silence except for the sound of cleaning. The house responded to her in small ways. Dust disappeared, glass began to catch light again. Air moved softer through open hallways. Elias noticed he had stopped locking his office door. He sat at his desk, reopened the file he had ignored for months. Numbers blurred. He closed it again. Downstairs, the vacuum stopped. A minute later, there was a knock. He hesitated. No one knocked here. "Yes," he said. Mara stepped halfway into the room holding a silver tray. "I made coffee," she said simply. He blinked. He had not asked. She placed the cup on his desk. The scent was sharp and bitter, exactly as he drank it. She must have guessed. He stared at the cup, steam rising, and asked, "How did you know?" She shrugged. People who don't talk much usually like their coffee strong. He didn't answer. Her eyes flicked to the monitors behind him, then back to his face. She seemed to realize she was being watched in more ways than one. "I'll stay out of the West Wing," she said, a note of understanding in her tone. "That's where she used to paint, isn't it?" Elias froze. "How do you know that?" "There are brushes in the kitchen drawer labeled L. The name on the canvas in the storage room is Lila Crane." Her voice was quiet, but not invasive, just observant. He forced a breath. "You clean, not analyze." She nodded, calm. "Yes, sir, but cleaning tells you things." She turned and left before he could respond. That evening, Elias stood by the window as the tide came in. The house felt changed again. There was a faint warmth to it now, a heartbeat beneath the glass. He tried not to think about it. He tried not to think about her. Mara, meanwhile, found her rhythm in the silence. Each morning she moved through rooms with a sense of reverence. As if cleaning could exorcise ghosts, the house smelled different soap, linen, lemon oil. When she wasn't working, she sat near the kitchen window, sketching in a small notebook. The drawings were simple, waves cups, the reflection of light on marble. She drew as if afraid someone might take the pencil away. At night she cooked for herself, but always left a plate covered in the fridge for him. He never acknowledged it, but the plates were always empty by morning. On the 7th day, the rain finally stopped. The horizon opened wide, streaked with gold and white. Mara stood outside the glass, her face tilted toward the wind. Elias watched from the hallway unseen. She seemed weightless, like the storm had carried away something heavy from her. She whispered something he couldn't hear. The camera didn't catch her words, only the movement of her lips. He wondered if she was praying or talking to herself. In the following weeks, her presence became part of the architecture. The cameras no longer felt necessary. He found himself listening instead to the soft shuffle of her shoes, the faint hum of a vacuum, the occasional clink of dishes. Sometimes he caught her reflection in the glass as she moved through rooms he hadn't entered since Lila died. It was strange the way her silence filled the air better than words ever had. Mara's life before this place felt like another country. In rare moments, memories came the smell of her father's workshop. The way he laughed through coughing fits the day the landlord took their house after the funeral. She had nowhere else to go. The job posting was her last chance. Here she didn't have to explain herself. Here she could just do things right. One afternoon, she found a broken mug on the balcony, shards still warm from sunlight. She gathered them carefully, fitting the pieces together on the counter. The crack looked like a scar. Without thinking, she glued it, smoothed it, placed it back beside the coffee pot. When Elias saw it later, he paused. It had been Lila's favorite mug, one he had thrown during a fight years ago. Now it stood whole again, a faint golden seam running through it like lightning. He didn't ask who fixed it, but the next morning there were 2 cups on the counter. The pattern continued, small quiet exchanges, almost invisible. She brewed coffee. He refilled her water bottle with filtered water from the tap. She fixed the garden lights. He ordered new gloves for her without mention. A strange peace settled between them, fragile but real. One evening, as the sun bled into the sea, she asked, "Do you ever go outside?" He looked up from his laptop. "Not often. Why?" She pointed toward the horizon. "Because sometimes it's beautiful." He followed her gaze, but saw only water. Beauty had long stopped registering for him. Still, the next morning he found himself on the terrace, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise. The air was colder than he remembered, alive with sound. Somewhere inside, Mara hummed softly a tune without words. The song drifted through the open door. He stood there for a long time until the light touched his face, and he realized he hadn't felt it in years. The day moved slower after that. In the quiet hum of the house, a balance began to form. Two people, both half-broken, orbiting each other without yet knowing why. The cameras stayed off. The silence no longer felt like punishment. The days in Big Sur blurred into shades of gray and salt. The ocean never rested, and neither did Elias Crane's ghosts. Mara Linwood moved through the house like wind through an empty cathedral, soft and unseen, filling the silence with her quiet persistence. The cameras tracked her, but even the machines seemed gentler when she was near. The glass walls that once felt like a prison began reflecting light again, as if the sea outside had found a reason to return the sun. One morning she was polishing the long hallway, where the family portraits were hidden behind linen covers. Dust motes swirled like memories in the air. Her hand slipped, and the frame she was lifting fell from her grip. The sound of glass shattering split the silence. She froze. The photo beneath the broken pane was of a woman laughing beside a dark-haired man. Lila Crane, the lost wife. Mara knelt, heart-hammering, gathering the shards in trembling hands. Elias appeared at the end of the corridor before she could hide them. What happened? His voice wasn't loud, but it carried like thunder. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I didn't mean to. I told you not to clean this wing. I didn't see the sign." She tried to meet his eyes, but couldn't. He took the frame from her glass, biting his palm. The photo caught a shaft of light, and for a moment he looked at his late wife's smile, like a man caught between grief and fury. "You shouldn't touch what you don't understand," he said coldly. Mara stepped back. The cut on his hand bled bright against the pale floor. Without thinking, she tore a strip from her apron and reached for his hand. "Please let me." Elias hesitated. Her fingers were gentle and her voice steadier than before. "You'll stain the wood if you leave it." He allowed her to wrap the cloth around his palm. The nearness of her touch unsettled him more than the broken glass. "You're too quiet for this house," he said. She looked up, eyes soft but sharp. "Maybe this house is too loud for your memories." The silence that followed was heavier than words. Then, for the first time in months, Elias smiled, barely but real. The next day, he found her in the music room, dusting the grand piano. The instrument hadn't been played since Lila's funeral. The lid creaked open, and sunlight spilled over ivory keys. "Do you play?" he asked. She shook her head. "My father used to. He said every song starts as a silence waiting to be trusted." "That's poetic," Elias murmured. He sat beside her and pressed one key. The note echoed haunting, fragile. "The house seemed to hold its breath." She said quietly, "I think this place misses her." He closed the lid and stood. Some ghosts prefer silence. That evening she cleaned the study while he worked on his laptop. The room was scattered with blueprints, half-finished projects, and sketches of a new building. A faint signature caught her eye, Lila's handwriting. "Lunaris Foundation. For lives worth building." She traced the edge of the paper, feeling the ink like a pulse. Elias noticed. "Don't touch that." His tone was sharp, defensive. She stepped back quickly. "I wasn't. It's just beautiful." He exhaled, pinching the bridge of his nose. It was her idea, the foundation. She wanted to fund schools for kids who never got a chance. I shelved it after she... He didn't finish. Why, Mara asked softly. Because I couldn't build something for others when I couldn't even keep her alive. The confession hung between them. Mara said quietly, maybe finishing it isn't for her. Maybe it's for you. He stared at her, not used to being seen past the armor. The rain outside began to fall harder. Later that night, he sat at his desk long after she went to sleep. The drawing she'd admired lay open before him. For the first time in a year, he picked up a pen and began to draw again. The line shook, but it was a start. Days passed and a fragile rhythm formed. He worked, she cleaned. She brewed coffee he never asked for. He left notes of tasks she'd already finished. The distance between them became its own language. Then one afternoon, Mara entered the library carrying a vase of lilies. The air smelled of dust and paper. Elias was on a call arguing with someone about a deal. His voice was hard, impatient. I don't care what the board thinks, Victor. Lunaris stays private. If Apex Tech wants a buyout, they'll have to drag me out in chains. Mara froze at the sound of the name Victor Hale, the assistant she hadn't yet met, but had heard in snippets of news about billion-dollar scandals. When Elias noticed her, he waved her off. She placed the vase down quietly, but knocked a book off the table. Papers scattered. She dropped to her knees to pick them up, and paused when she saw a photograph among them, a smiling couple at a charity gala. Lila's arm around Victor's waist, not Elias's. The intimacy in their pose was unmistakable. Elias snatched the photo before she could speak. It's not what you think. Her eyes met his. I didn't say anything. Good. Don't. His voice cracked just slightly before he turned away. That night, Mara couldn't sleep. She walked through the corridor where the broken frame had been. The moonlight made patterns across the floor. One pane of the repaired glass had a hairline fracture running through it, catching the silver light. She ran her finger along it, whispering to herself, we all break somewhere. Behind her, Elias's voice came low and weary. Does it bother you, the cracks? She turned, startled. He stood in the doorway barefoot, a glass of water in hand. No, she said, still tracing the line. It means the light can get in. He watched her quietly for a long time. You talk like someone who's been through more than 22 years should hold. She smiled faintly. Pain teaches early, sir. He stepped closer. Don't call me sir. It makes me feel like a stranger in my own house. What should I call you then? Elias is fine. The ocean outside thundered. For a moment it felt as though the house itself exhaled. He said softly, Mara, why did you really come here? She hesitated, because the job sounded like a place no one else wanted to be. And maybe I didn't either. Elias looked down at the fracture in the glass beside her hand. The crack caught their reflections together, distorted but connected. Sometimes he said quietly, things don't need to be fixed to be worth keeping. She met his gaze and nodded. The air thickened with unspoken things, not romantic yet, but deeply human, two people hovering at the edge of being seen. When she finally went to her room that night, he stayed in the hallway staring at the line of light under her door. His chest felt heavy, not with grief this time, but with something he almost recognized. The sea roared louder against the cliffs, and the glass walls trembled, as though the past itself had shifted, making room for something fragile and new. The storm that night came without warning, sweeping across the California coast like the world was trying to erase itself. Thunder rolled over the cliffs, the glass mansion flickered with lightning, and the Pacific roared against the rocks. Mara Linwood was finishing the last of the dishes when the lights blinked once, then died. The sudden silence was total. She froze, the sound of her breath, the only proof she still existed. Somewhere upstairs, something fell sharp, metallic, final. She grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and moved through the hallway, her reflection flashing in every pane of glass. "Mr. Crane," she called, her voice trembling. No answer. The house groaned with the wind. She climbed the staircase, the beam of light trembling in her hands. The door to the library was ajar. Inside, the air smelled of paper salt and something metallic. Elias lay on the floor near the shelves, one hand gripping his chest, the other reaching for the table. "Elias," she gasped, dropping beside him. His breathing was shallow, ragged. "Heart meds," he whispered. "Desk drawer." She scrambled to it, spilling papers and finding a small white bottle. Her fingers shook as she unscrewed the cap and placed a pill under his tongue. His hand caught hers, trembling, desperate. "Don't leave me," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper against the thunder. "Please don't, I won't," she said, holding his hand tighter than she meant to. The flashlight flickered, throwing their shadows across the walls like ghosts of other nights. He was cold but alive. "You're going to be okay," she murmured. "Just breathe." He looked at her through half-lidded eyes, the storm reflected in them. "You shouldn't see me like this." "Like what human?" he rasped. "You should go." She shook her head, her wet hair sticking to her face. "I'm not going anywhere." She lifted his head onto her lap, brushing his damp hair back. He let out a small, broken laugh. "You're too brave for this job." "I've never done this before," she said softly, voice trembling with fear, and something deeper she didn't understand. "But I can learn." He stared at her, the ghost of a smile on his lips. "Neither have I." The wind howled. For a moment, the world narrowed to the sound of their breathing, the kind of silence that holds two heartbeats too close. Lightning flashed, illuminating the fragments of the broken window, the rain spilling in. She reached for the blanket, draped over the chair, covering him with careful hands. "It'll pass soon," she whispered. "The storm always does." "Does it?" he asked weakly. "Some storms never leave." She looked down at him, eyes wet. "Then we build a roof strong enough to wait it out." He blinked slowly, a tear escaping the corner of his eye. "Lila used to say things like that." Mara hesitated. She sounded kind. "She was," he said quietly, until the world convinced her she wasn't enough. The pain in his words felt like a confession. She brushed a speck of glass off his sleeve. "She loved you," she said. "That doesn't just disappear. Neither does guilt," he whispered. "I pushed her too far. The work, the silence, the pressure. Maybe I didn't kill her, but I didn't stop her either." Mara's throat tightened. Maybe she just got tired of being strong alone. He looked up at her, the raw honesty between them, heavy as the storm. "Why are you here, Mara?" he asked suddenly. "What are you running from?" She froze, but his gaze didn't relent. The truth spilled before she could stop it. "My father died last year. He was sick for a long time. I took care of him until he couldn't speak anymore. I thought I could save him if I just didn't sleep, if I prayed enough, if I tried harder. But he died in my arms anyway." Her voice cracked. "When they buried him, I didn't cry. I just wanted the noise to stop." She looked down, her fingers still wrapped around his. "So when I saw your name, your house, I thought maybe if I cleaned something broken enough, it might clean me too." The lightning outside painted their faces in silver and shadow. Elias's breathing steadied. He whispered, "You sound like her." Who, Lila? She thought she could save everyone but herself. Maybe she did, Mara said. Maybe she saved someone who's still learning how to live. He smiled weakly. You talk like silence has meaning. Maybe it does, she said. Maybe silence is just love waiting for the right moment to speak. The rain softened, but neither of them moved. The generator kicked on, humming back to life, restoring light to the room. The sudden brightness made the moment feel fragile, exposed. Elias blinked against it, still holding her hand. "Thank you," he said, "for staying." "It's just a job," she whispered. "No," he said firmly, "it's not." The clock on the mantel ticked quietly. She rose to get him water, but his fingers tightened around hers once more. "Don't go yet." She nodded and sat beside him again. The house, once cold and distant, seemed to breathe with them. The fireplace flickered as the generator surged, throwing orange light over the walls. He looked at her, his expression soft raw. "You don't belong here," he said. "Neither do you," she replied. He laughed under his breath, then winced. She smiled faintly. "See proof we're both misplaced furniture." He stared at her like she was something he'd forgotten. Existed warmth that didn't demand anything in return. "You're strange, Mara Linwood. You're impossible, Mr. Crane." "Elias," he corrected. "Elias?" She repeated, her voice tasting the name like a secret. They sat like that for a long time until the storm outside faded into drizzle. The sound of the waves softened. She stood finally. "You should rest." He leaned back against the couch, exhaustion in every line of his face. "You'll stay, won't you?" "Until morning," she promised. She turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. "Elias?" He opened his eyes halfway. "Yes, you're wrong," she said gently. "You didn't kill her. You don't know that." "I don't need to," she replied. "I can see how much you still love her. People who kill love don't keep its ghost alive." She disappeared down the hall, leaving him staring at the empty space she'd filled. The storm had passed, but the house still smelled like rain. Elias pressed a hand to his bandaged chest and whispered, "Neither have I." Upstairs, Mara lay awake, listening to the low hum of the generator and the steady rhythm of the sea. Her hands still trembled from holding him. She looked at the reflection of her face in the dark glass, the same girl who had walked through the storm alone. But something in her eyes was different now. Somewhere in the house below, a man who hadn't spoken in months was breathing easier. The ocean outside stretched infinite and black, but for the first time it felt like it might belong to them both. The morning came clear and brittle, the kind of light that exposes more than it warms. The storm had passed, leaving the glass mansion washed clean salt streaks, still drying on the windows. Downstairs, Elias Crane stirred from a dreamless sleep on the library couch, the blanket still half covering him. The scent of rain lingered in the air mixed with coffee. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. Then memory hit the collapse, her hands steadying him, her whisper, "I've never done this before." He sat up slowly, noticing the glass Mara had set on the table beside him, the water still half full, and a folded note breakfast in the kitchen. "Rest if you can." She was gone by the time he reached the kitchen. The dishes were clean, the counter immaculate, as if she had erased herself from the room. Only the quiet hum of the refrigerator kept him company. He poured himself coffee and sat at the counter, watching fog roll off the sea. Upstairs, Mara packed her bag in silence. She had told herself last night's storm was a mistake. Too close, too honest, too human. She had come to this house for work, not to heal a man whose grief was larger than the ocean. And yet she couldn't stop remembering the way his voice had softened when he said her name. She placed her father's rosary in her pocket, zipped her small duffel, and took one last look around the guest room. The bed was made with military precision, the only sign of her stay. A faint outline of her shoes on the carpet. Downstairs, Elias opened his laptop for the first time in weeks. His inbox was a battlefield of messages. From Victor Hale, subject urgent, board decision pending. He read the first few lines. Return to Lunaris headquarters immediately, or the board will move forward with Apex Tech's buyout proposal. Silence will be treated as consent. His jaw tightened. He had built Lunaris from a garage with Lila by his side, built it to make technology humane, to give people connection. Now they wanted to turn it into another corporate machine. The sound of movement at the front door broke his concentration. Mara stood there with her bag slung over her shoulder. She had changed into a pale sweater and jeans, her hair still damp from the morning mist. Leaving, he asked, voice unreadable. She froze, then nodded. You don't need me anymore. I didn't say that. You don't have to. Elias closed the laptop and stood his height, shadowing the light behind her. You think what happened last night was a mistake, she cut in. You were sick. I helped. That's all. You call that all? It's safer that way. He studied her, trying to read the truth behind her calm. You always run when things get close. She gripped her bag tighter. I've learned people only hold doors, open long enough to prove they can close them. The words hit harder than he expected. That's not what I'm doing. Then what are you doing, Elias? You barely speak. You hide behind your glass walls. And now suddenly, you want to talk about what's real. The accusation in her voice stung, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. Maybe I'm trying, he said quietly. Trying doesn't fix people. Maybe not, he admitted, but it keeps them from drowning. For a long moment, neither moved. The house, usually a cocoon of silence, seemed to hold its breath. Then Elias said softer, I got a message from the board this morning. If I don't go back, they'll sell the company. The only thing Lila ever asked me to protect. Mara looked at him. Then go. Save it. You think it's that simple. Nothing ever is, she said, opening the door. The wind rushed in from the cliffs, tugging at her hair. Why do you keep running? He asked again, almost a whisper. Because no one ever asks me to stay. Her voice cracked at the end, betraying the strength she tried to wear. She stepped outside before he could find words. He stood there long after she was gone, the door still half open, the sound of waves filling the space she left. The hours crawled by. Elias sat in his office, staring at the half-drawn plans for the Lunaris Foundation. The silence of the house returned heavier this time, pressing on his chest like guilt. He thought of her words. Trying doesn't fix people. Maybe she was right. Maybe some things weren't meant to be fixed. Maybe they were meant to be felt. At dusk, he walked down the hallway to the guest room. It was spotless bed-made towels folded everything in its place. On the nightstand, a small piece of paper lay folded in half. He unfolded it slowly. Thank you for the roof, for the silence, for the reminder that not all storms are made of rain. He sat on the edge of the bed, holding the note. Outside, the sea swallowed the last of the light. Mara boarded a bus heading north along Highway 1. The cliffs fell away behind her, and the reflection of the ocean moved like a heartbeat against the glass. She tried to read, but every word blurred into the same memory. the weight of his hand in hers, his voice trembling in the dark. She pressed her forehead against the window and whispered to the glass, "You'll be fine without me." But the ache in her chest said otherwise. Back at the mansion, Elias poured himself another cup of coffee, the one she used to bring without asking. It was too bitter, too strong. He left it untouched and walked to the window. Fog was rolling in again, soft and endless. He could almost see her silhouette there standing, where she'd once said the house was too loud for his memories. "You're wrong, Mara," he said under his breath. "The silence misses you." The next morning the board meeting began. Victor Hale's voice came sharp through the speaker. "Elias, if you're not ready to sign, we'll move forward without you." Elias stared at the contract on his screen, the cursor blinking over his name. The room around him reflected in the glass wall, empty, echoing alive with the ghost of her presence. "I'll be there," he said finally, voice steady. "About time," Victor muttered. Elias ended the call and stood. He looked around the house one last time, the piano, the half-finished sketches, the faint imprint of a coffee cup beside his computer. Then he walked to the window, where she had once said cracks let the light in. The hairline fracture still ran through the glass, catching the morning sun. "Maybe it's supposed to stay broken," he whispered. Outside the Pacific shimmered like liquid silver. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a bus was carrying a girl who didn't believe anyone would ask her to stay. He turned from the window, picked up his keys, and left the house for the first time since the funeral. The sea wind followed him down the drive as if urging him forward. Behind him, the mansion stood still and quiet again, but it no longer felt lifeless. Something in its walls had shifted. Something was waiting to come home. The city felt louder than Elias remembered. San Francisco was a maze of glass and noise sunlight, glinting off the towers like a cruel reminder of what he'd built and what it had cost him. He stepped out of the car in front of Lunaris headquarters, the skyscraper that bore his name. Cameras flashed from the sidewalk. Someone whispered, "That's him, the recluse billionaire, finally back." He didn't look up. The elevator carried him to the 42nd floor in silence. The doors opened to the familiar hum of money and fear. Victor Hale was waiting, all sharp suit and confident grin, though his eyes flickered when he saw Elias. "Elias," he said smoothly, "you look revived. California sea air treating you well." "You sent the board threats in my absence," Elias replied flatly. "That's not reviving, that's coercion." Victor spread his hands. "Coercion is such an ugly word. The company needed direction. You disappeared. Someone had to keep it alive." "Alive doesn't mean soulless. Soulless still sells," Victor said with a smirk. "Now let's sign off on the Apex Tech merger and get you back in the headlines where you belong." "I don't want the headlines," Elias said. "I want the work." Victor's smile thinned. "Then you'd better control your distractions." The word landed like a hook. "What are you talking about?" Victor's eyes gleamed. "Check your phone." A notification blinked. Elias opened it and the world tilted. There it was, a photo, grainy, intimate of him, half collapsed on the library floor. Mara kneeling beside him, his hand gripping hers, her face turned toward his in raw concern. The caption burned across the screen, "Widowed billionaire replaces dead wife with young maid." The article had already gone viral. Comments poured in by the minute. "Gold digger, homewrecker, creepy old man. She's half his age. Where did you get this?" he demanded, voice cold. Victor leaned against the table. "I didn't. The world did." Maybe your security isn't as private as you thought. Maybe your cameras love drama as much as the rest of us. You leaked this. Proof. Victor said with a shrug. Relax, it'll fade in a week. People love a scandal. Besides, it humanizes you. She's not part of this, Elias snapped. She was the moment you opened that door. Elias's fist slammed the table. You're done here, am I? Victor said quietly. You fire me, you'll have a lawsuit on your hands. You keep me and I'll make sure the investors forget all about your little maid. Elias's knuckles whitened. You think this is power? It's leverage, Victor said. And leverage keeps empires standing. The meeting ended with a silence sharper than words. Elias left before he did something irreversible. Meanwhile, miles away, in a small cafe near the harbor, Mara balanced a tray of coffee cups and tried to keep her hands from shaking. The shop smelled of roasted beans and salt air, a quiet refuge for people passing through. She liked that being surrounded by lives that would never know hers. But that morning her peace shattered with a single headline. Elias Crane's new Maid dead wife's look-alike. Her photo, the one from the library, covered the screen of every customer's phone. The words underneath blurred as she read them: orphan, uneducated, opportunist, replacing the ghost of Lila Crane. Her knees went weak. The tray slipped from her hands, cups crashing to the floor. The sound made everyone turn. Mara, the manager, called. You okay? She knelt quickly, muttering, I'm fine, though her chest burned. Her reflection in the spilled coffee looked like someone else entirely. Outside reporters were already gathering, shouting questions as she tried to leave. Did you seduce him? Is it true you lived with him alone? Are you pregnant? Flashes exploded like gunfire. She pushed past them, trembling. Please stop. One microphone caught her shoulder. Did you love him, Mara? She froze. Love him. The word hit too close. I worked for him, she said through gritted teeth. That's all. But her voice cracked on worked. The cameras caught it. Within hours, her image was everywhere. The comments turned savage. She's lying. Look at her eyes. He's too old. She's too poor. She turned off her phone, shoved it deep into her bag, and ran until she reached the pier. The ocean stretched gray and endless, the same as the one below his house, but colder now, crueler. At Lunaris, the board demanded a statement. Elias stood before the press wall cameras, flashing like lightning. A journalist shouted, Mr. Crane, is it true you've been living with a young maid after your wife's death? His jaw tightened. She worked for me, yes. And the rumors of intimacy, another asked. His chest tightened. The world seemed to tilt toward that single word truth. But the thought of her face, her fear, stopped him. She was just a maid, he said, finally, voice clipped. Nothing more. The microphone swarmed closer. So the rumors are false. They are, he said. She deserves privacy. The press conference ended, but his words echoed in his head. She was just a maid. Each syllable tasted like betrayal. That night, Mara sat alone on a bus bench outside the cafe, a single duffel at her feet. TV inside the diner played the news on mute. She saw his face, his calm denial, his eyes distant. She was just a maid. Her heart broke quietly without sound. She whispered, You could have said anything else. Rain began to fall again, soft at first, then harder, blurring the lights of the street. She pulled her coat tighter and stared at the reflection of her trembling hands. Back in his penthouse, Elias threw the remote across the room, the sound splintering against the wall. He couldn't breathe. The phone rang again and again, Victor the board reporters, but he ignored them all. When the ringing finally stopped, He opened the drawer where Lila's sketches had once been kept. The folder was gone. He searched the desk, the cabinet, the files. Gone. The realization came slow and cold. Victor hadn't just leaked the photos he'd stolen. The foundation plans, too. The one thing that still tied Lila's name to something good. His pulse hammered. He stormed back to the office, ignoring the startled guard. The door to Victor's office was locked. He kicked it open. "Where are the files?" Victor looked up from his computer, unbothered. "Evening, boss. You're not supposed to be here." Elias slammed the desk. "Where are they, relax? I sent them to Apex Tech. They offered a generous bonus for exclusive rights to the project. I figured it was better than letting your dead wife's charity rot in storage." Elias's vision went red. "You're stealing her work." "No," Victor said coolly. "I'm monetizing it." Elias grabbed him by the collar. "You leaked those photos, destroyed that girl's life. And now you're selling my wife's legacy." "Your legacy," Victor sneered, "was silence. Someone had to speak for you." Elias's fist connected. Before he could stop himself, Victor hit the wall, blood blooming at his lip. He laughed through it. "Hit me again and I'll sue you into oblivion." "Do it," Elias growled. "At least then, the world will know who you really are." He turned and left before rage consumed him entirely. Outside, the wind off the bay felt like knives. The city lights blurred through his tears, anger, guilt, exhaustion. He knew he had to find a way to undo this, but first he had to face the damage he'd already done. He called Mara's number. It rang once, then went dead. He tried again. The line had been disconnected. He sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The rain hit the windshield like static. "She was just a maid," he repeated under his breath, each word heavier, hollower. He didn't realize he was crying until the salt blurred his vision. Across town, Mara lay awake in a cheap motel room, staring at the ceiling. Her phone buzzed with unknown numbers. She refused to answer. She scrolled through social media, the hate comments endless. Her throat tightened when she saw a small account post one photo, not of scandal, but of her cleaning the window, weeks ago, sunlight on her hair. The caption read, "She doesn't look like a gold digger. She looks tired." One comment below said simply, "Maybe she was kind to him. Maybe that's why they're angry." She closed her eyes. The rain outside softened, and she whispered to herself, "Kindness isn't weakness." Then she turned off the phone, letting the darkness have her. The next morning, Victor Hale held a press conference, announcing his resignation for personal reasons. Behind him, the leaked designs for the Lunaris Foundation flashed on a screen rebranded under Apex Tech. Reporters cheered, investors smiled, and somewhere between them, Elias Crane's silence began to crack. He stood before the mirror in his penthouse, the skyline behind him, and finally understood the cost of silence. It protected no one. He opened his laptop, typed one line on his company's public feed, and hit post. "Truth doesn't hide behind contracts. Wait for mine." Then he closed the computer, grabbed his coat, and walked into the rain. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. San Francisco drowned in the gray wash of it, a city reflected through a dirty window. Elias Crane walked its streets like a ghost in an expensive coat. Unshaven, exhausted eyes, dull with sleeplessness. Every headline, every whisper, carried the same name, his and hers linked forever by a lie he'd let stand. He hadn't heard her voice since the night she left, but every time the wind brushed the glass of a passing building, he thought he heard her say it again. "You didn't ask me to stay." The apartment he'd rented downtown was smaller than any office he'd ever owned. He lived among boxes now, folders, photographs, fragments of a life he'd broken himself. On the fourth night, he opened one of the boxes marked Lila. Inside were letters she'd written, but never sent, printed emails she'd saved from their early days. And near the bottom, folded between her sketches, was a sealed envelope with his name scrawled in her hand. If you ever stop building, you stop being the man I fell in love with. He stared at it for a long time. The words felt like a door cracking open in his chest. He realized what Victor had done wasn't just betrayal, it was desecration. Victor had taken Lila's last hope, her unfinished dream, and turned it into profit. And Elias, in his silence, had helped him do it. The next morning he boarded a train to New York. The city was colder there, the kind of cold that stripped everything soft from the air. He visited the one place Lila had loved more than their mansion, the children's home she'd once funded. Quietly, through anonymous donation, the building was smaller than he expected. The roof leaked. The kids were using broken computers older than he was. A nun with silver hair recognized him from the news. She didn't smile. "We used to get checks from someone named Lunar Light," she said. "Then they stopped coming. That was her, wasn't it?" He nodded. It was. She was kind, the woman said. Never came in person. Said she didn't want the thanks, just wanted the noise to stop. He swallowed hard. She said that, the nun nodded. She said kindness shouldn't have to announce itself to exist. He sat in the pews long after the children went to bed, the envelope still in his pocket, the letter burning a hole through his guilt. That same night back in California, Mara stood outside a homeless shelter in Oakland, holding her last paycheck in one hand and a plastic bag with everything she owned in the other. Her phone buzzed on the bench beside her, another reporter asking for her side. She turned it off. Her manager from the cafe had called earlier to tell her not to come back. Too much attention. Too much mess. "You didn't do anything wrong," he'd said gently. But customers don't like drama with their lattes. Now sitting beneath a flickering streetlight, she laughed without humor. She pulled out the newspaper she'd refused to read for days. His face stared back at her, the headline beneath Crane promises truth. Reveal in coming weeks. Truth, she whispered. What's left of it? A man nearby coughed, and she reached into her bag, offering him the rest of her sandwich. He nodded gratefully. "Kindness shouldn't have to announce itself," she said softly, repeating the words her father used to tell her. "But sometimes it has to survive loud enough to be heard." A week later, Victor Hale was arrested for fraud and insider trading. The Apex Tech deal collapsed overnight. The world watched as his empire crumbled, the Hale's leaked contracts exposed. None of it healed Elias. He didn't feel vindicated. He felt hollow. The day of Victor's hearing, Elias walked into the courthouse uninvited. The reporters swarmed him, shouting questions. He ignored them all. Victor in handcuffs looked up as Elias passed. "You think this redeems you?" he sneered. "You still threw her under the bus. You can't rebuild your soul with someone else's ruin." Elias didn't answer. He left the courthouse and walked aimlessly through the city, ending up at the East River as snow began to fall. The water below reflected the lights of Manhattan, fractured like a broken mirror. He pulled the letter from his pocket again and unfolded it slowly. Lila's handwriting was steady but fading. "Eli, I know you'll bury yourself in work to survive me. But don't forget that love is meant to be shared, not punished. If you ever stop building, you stop being the man I fell in love with. Don't make silence your legacy. Make kindness your rebellion." The words blurred as tears filled his eyes. For the first time since she died, he wept without shame. Mara found work cleaning classrooms at night for a community college. It wasn't much, but it was quiet, and the students smiled when they saw her. One evening while wiping down the desks, she heard the janitor's radio playing a news segment. In a surprising turn, the anchor said Elias Crane, CEO of Lunaris, has pledged to relaunch the Lunaris Foundation, this time under his late wife's name, and with full public ownership transparency. He's called it a chance to rebuild with purpose. She froze her hand, tightening around the rag. The host continued. When asked about the recent scandal, Crane said, "Silence protects no one. I failed someone who didn't deserve it. This foundation is my apology and not my defense." The janitor shook his head. "Rich folks always finding new ways to sound holy," he said, switching the station, but Mara didn't hear him anymore. She just stood there staring at the reflection of the classroom lights in the window, her heart a battlefield of anger and forgiveness. She wanted to believe him. She wanted not to. 2 days later, a letter arrived at the shelter where she sometimes volunteered. It was addressed simply to Mara Linwood. The handwriting was clean, deliberate, familiar. Inside was a single sentence. "Sometimes the apology you never hear is the one the world witnesses for you." No signature, but she didn't need one. She folded the letter carefully, placed it inside her notebook and whispered, "Then let the world keep watching." Elias returned to California soon after. The mansion stood where he left it, overlooking the ocean, unchanged but no longer cold. He opened every curtain, every door, letting light flood through the house for the first time in years. He played the piano Lila once loved, clumsy and halting, but the sound filled the emptiness. He called his legal team and donated 60% of his company's profits to the foundation, naming it the Linwood Program. When the announcement went public, the backlash was instant. "He's just trying to clean his image. Why name it after her? What's the angle?" He didn't care. For once, he didn't care about optics. He cared that someone somewhere might see her name and remember compassion. That night, he walked to the glass window overlooking the sea. The hairline crack was still there, running from one corner to another, catching the moonlight. "Some things aren't meant to be repaired," he said softly, "only understood." He poured a single glass of wine, the first in months, and lifted it toward the dark ocean. "To you, Leela," he said quietly, then paused, "and to you, Mara, wherever you are." The ocean answered in waves. In a small apartment across the city, Mara scrolled through her phone for the first time in weeks. The news feed was full of debates about the foundation, but buried among them was a photo someone had taken at the press event. Elias stood behind the podium, wind tugging his hair, the words, "The Linwood Program," etched on the banner behind him. His eyes looked older, but lighter somehow. She smiled, tears blurring the screen. "You finally built something that speaks," she whispered. And somewhere in the distance, as the Pacific wind swept through both their windows, it felt like they were breathing the same air again. Broken, bruised, but alive. The morning of the press conference dawned with a rare calm over Big Sur. The sky washed clean after weeks of rain. The sea glimmered steel blue beneath the cliffs. And for the first time in years, the house above didn't look like a fortress. Elias Crane stood at the window. The Pacific spread before him, its immensity, reminding him of everything he had lost and everything he had yet to make right. In the distance, sunlight caught the fractured edge of the glass pane, the same crack that had survived every storm. He didn't fix it, he let it stay. He dressed simply that morning. No tailored suit, no expensive tie, just a gray shirt and a blazer that still smelled faintly of rain. When he left the house, he carried nothing but a single folder, the new charter for the Linwood program. Down the coast, reporters were already gathering in Monterey for the announcement. Social media buzzed with speculation. Is this Crane's redemption tour, why name it, after the Maid publicity stunt or penance? Elias read none of it. He had stopped reading what people thought of him the night he realized he couldn't stand the sound of his own silence. The conference took place in a renovated community center, the first building his foundation would restore. Children's drawings covered the walls, crooked suns, and uneven hearts. He took the stage with no teleprompter, no notes. The cameras clicked like restless insects waiting for spectacle. Instead, they got quiet. He looked out at the crowd, reporters, investors, a few members of his team, who still believed in him, and said simply, "I'm not here to sell anything." The room hushed. For years, I thought success was about how much you could build before life took it from you. But I forgot that some things you build aren't meant to make profit. They're meant to make peace. A murmur rippled through the audience. "You've heard about my mistakes," he continued. "I made them. I own them. I betrayed trust I didn't deserve to have and hurt someone who didn't deserve to be dragged through the wreckage of my silence." A reporter interrupted. "Are you referring to Mara Linwood?" Elias looked directly at her. "I am. She reminded me that kindness doesn't need a headline. This foundation bears her name because she taught me that redemption isn't something you declare, it's something you live." The cameras exploded in flashes. He didn't flinch. "Starting today," he said, "Lunaris will give 60% of its profits to fund the Linwood program, a nationwide initiative providing education in technology and creative arts for underprivileged youth. No bureaucracy, no corporate ownership, real funding, real lives, real second chances." A child clapped from the front row before anyone else did. The sound broke the tension like sunlight through fog. The applause spread cautious at first, then genuine. Outside, the news vans broadcasted the speech live. Within hours, the clip had gone viral. Some called it manipulation, others called it bravery. But in every version shared online, one line kept echoing through comments stitched over images of his face and the ocean behind him. Kindness doesn't need a headline. That night, Mara was cleaning the hallway of the college when she heard a student shout from the lounge, "Yo, he actually did it. The billionaire guy. It's all over TikTok." She looked up. On the mounted TV, Elias stood behind the podium, the words "The Linwood Program" glinting on the banner behind him. The students debated whether it was real or PR, their voices a blur. But to Mara, the sound of his voice, steady, quiet, true, cut through all of it. She stood frozen, mop still, in hand eyes on the screen. "Sometimes the apology you never hear is the one the world witnesses for you," he said again, as if speaking straight through the glass between them. One of the students glanced over. "You good, ma'am?" Mara smiled faintly. "Yeah," she whispered. "I think so." Later that evening, when she walked home through the drizzle, she noticed a flyer pinned to the college board. The Linwood program recruiting local teachers for pilot classes. She stared at it for a long time, her breath fogging the paper. At the bottom was a line of text: "Contact Coordinator for Arts and Youth Programs, Mr. Elias Crane." Her heart skipped. She tore off the small slip with the contact email and folded it into her pocket. The next week, Elias sat at the long table of the newly refurbished center, surrounded by files and blueprints. His assistant handed him updates, numbers, donations, plans, but his mind drifted to the note he'd sent Mara and the silence that followed. He hadn't expected a reply, yet every morning he still checked his inbox before his coffee turned cold. Then one afternoon it came. Subject regarding the program. Body. If I were to teach, I'd need supplies and maybe a roof that doesn't leak. Let me know if your foundation handles that kind of repair. It wasn't much, but it was everything. He smiled, leaning back in his chair. She answered. His assistant looked up. Sir, nothing, he said softly. Just the universe getting a little less quiet. 2 months later, the Linwood Center opened its doors in Portland, the same city where Mara had once held her father's hand through sickness and silence. The building, once crumbling, now glowed with light and children's laughter. Mara stood in the art room, surrounded by canvases and paints. Her hair tied back her hands, smudged with color. She turned when she heard footsteps behind her. Elias stood in the doorway, holding a box of new brushes. He looked different still, the same man, but lighter somehow. The sea gray in his eyes had softened. I heard you needed supplies, he said, voice almost shy. She folded her arms, feigning calm. And a roof that doesn't leak, working on it, and a raise. He smiled. You drive a hard bargain, Ms. Linwood. I've learned from the best, she said. They stood in the middle of the art room, the smell of paint and possibility filling the air. Kids ran past them laughing, oblivious to the history in the space. Why did you name it after me? She asked finally. Because it wasn't about me anymore, he said simply. It never should have been. She looked at him, eyes bright but uncertain. You didn't have to do all this. Maybe not, he said, but I wanted to. She nodded, her throat tightening. It's good work, Elias. It's your work too, he said quietly. For a long moment they stood in silence, the kind that didn't separate but connected. He said finally, You could have stayed angry. I was, she admitted, until I realized anger keeps you warm for a night, but forgiveness keeps you alive. He looked at her, then really looked, and the air between them shifted, no longer cold, no longer tentative, just real. You make it sound easy, he said. Nothing about it was, she replied, but neither was kindness, and you still learned that. He laughed softly. Maybe we both did. Outside, the sky over Portland cleared a thin beam of sunlight, slipping through the window, landing on the corner of her easel. She followed its path with her eyes and said, You know, I used to think light only came through cracks. Maybe it still does, he said. We just built walls that could finally hold it. A child's voice called her name, and she turned away for a moment. When she looked back, Elias was watching her hands in his pockets, expression unreadable, but full of quiet pride. You're staying in town? She asked. For a while, he said. Until the roof stopped leaking. She smiled. That could take years, then years it is. She shook her head but didn't argue. As he left the art room, the laughter of children followed him down the hall. He paused once at the door, glancing back. Mara was leaning over a canvas, guiding a young girl's hand as she painted, her voice soft and patient. The sunlight framed her like a portrait. Elias whispered, You finally found the noise worth keeping. Outside, the foundation's sign gleamed in gold. The Linwood Program for Real Lives, Real Second Chances. For the first time in his life, the sound of applause, headlines, and noise didn't matter. What mattered was the hum of creation inside that building, the sound of redemption, of love rebuilding itself one brushstroke at a time. 6 months passed. The Linwood program grew like a quiet miracle, expanding across cities, rebuilt from broken blueprints and forgotten names. Its first success stories were already appearing online. A boy from Oakland who learned to code his first app, a girl from Seattle whose painting won a state award. Every headline carried her name and his together, now not in scandal but in purpose. Still, they hadn't spoken since the opening day. Mara kept her focus on her students, on the art rooms filled with color and chaos, while Elias retreated into the quieter side of rebuilding meetings, foundations, endowments. Redemption, after all, wasn't loud. It was patient. On a gray morning in late autumn, rain slicked the streets of Portland. The cafe near the Linwood Center was half full, the air rich with the smell of roasted beans and wet leaves. Behind the counter, Mara wiped down tables, humming softly to herself. Teaching had given her peace, but bills still existed, and she liked the simplicity of this job, the quiet routine, the strangers who came and went without questions. A chime rang as the door opened. She didn't look up right away. Her hands were busy, her mind elsewhere. Then she heard a voice she hadn't heard in half a year. "You still hum when you're thinking," he said. She froze. Slowly she looked up. Elias stood near the doorway, rain on his shoulders, the same gray coat she remembered from that night by the sea. He looked older, softer, more alive somehow. His hair was damp, his eyes tired, but they carried the kind of light only found after storms. "Elias," she whispered. The sound of his name in her mouth felt strange and right all at once. He stepped closer, offering a tentative smile. "You remember? Hard to forget the man who broke the internet with my face," she said, trying to sound light, though her heart pounded. He winced. "I deserved that." "You did," she said simply. A pause stretched between them. 6 months of silence condensed into a breath. "I came to see the art classes," he said finally. "And the roof. Still leaking, only when it rains sideways," she said. "But the kids don't mind. They think it's part of the charm." He smiled faintly. "Charm, that's one word for it." She turned away to wipe another table, grounding herself in small movements. "You could have emailed or called." "I tried," he said. "Every day. I just never hit send." "Why?" "Because I wanted to show up, not explain." She looked at him, really looked the man who had once hidden behind walls of glass, now standing in a small cafe that smelled like sugar and hope. "So what are you here to show me?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "That I rebuilt everything. The company, the foundation, the walls I broke. But the house is still empty." Her breath caught. "You came all this way to tell me you're lonely." "No," he said, "to tell you I don't want to be." She blinked, startled by the honesty in his tone. "Elias," she began carefully, "we built something good. Let's not ruin it with what the truth." "With nostalgia," she said. "It's easy to mistake healing for love." He stepped closer. "Maybe they're the same thing." She shook her head, her throat tight. "I'm still scared, Elias. So am I." "You don't understand? Then tell me." She dropped the rag, her hands trembling. "Every time I start to care about someone, they leave. My mother, my father, you. And when they come back, I'm supposed to just open the door like nothing happened." "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said. "I'm asking for a chance to stay this time." The air between them shifted. She could feel the weight of his sincerity pressing through the noise of the cafe, the hum of coffee machines, the soft chatter of strangers. "You don't get to just show up and fix everything," she whispered. "I'm not here to fix anything," he said. "I just want to hold what's left." The words undid her. She looked away, blinking hard. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope weathered from travel. "I was supposed to give you this a long time ago." She took it reluctantly, opening it to find a photograph her standing by the ocean, the day she'd left, captured from inside the house through the glass wall. Her hair was windblown, her face half hidden. On the back, a single line written in his hand. "You were the only thing that ever made the silence feel alive." "You kept this?" she asked, voice cracking. "Every day," he said, "because it reminded me of what I almost lost to pride." The world around them blurred, the hiss of milk frothers' rain against the window, the faint hum of music. It all felt far away. "I don't know if I can go back," she whispered. "Neither can I," he said. "But maybe we can go forward." She looked up at him then, and the exhaustion, the hurt, the memories, they all pooled into something softer. "You still talk in riddles," she said weakly. "You still listen to them," he replied. A laugh slipped out of her, small but real. It felt like the first light after a long storm. For a while they just stood there, two people who had once broken each other, now standing quietly in the same space again. No apology, no grand gesture, just proximity and breath. Outside, the rain slowed. The clouds parted slightly, a pale glow spilling through the window. He reached out, then hesitant. "May I?" She didn't move, didn't speak. He took one small step closer, then another, and then he leaned in. It wasn't a kiss of passion, but one of recognition, of shared ache and fragile hope. Their foreheads touched first, a quiet meeting of worlds that had circled too long apart. He whispered, "You taught me that love isn't loud," she whispered back. "And you taught me it isn't silent either." The door chimed again. Customers entered, the world continuing, as if nothing monumental had happened. But between them, everything had. When they finally pulled back, she exhaled, her eyes wet but smiling. "You really did rebuild everything, didn't you?" "Almost," he said. "There was one piece missing, and now I think I found it." She shook her head lightly, wiping her eyes. "You always did, like fixing broken things." "Not fixing," he said. "Understanding." They sat down at the nearest table, neither in a rush to fill the quiet. The waitress brought 2 coffees without being asked, as if sensing the moment. So Mara said, wrapping her hands around the cup. "What happens next?" Elias looked out the window, where the sky was finally clearing. "Whatever you want. I'm done running the world. I'd rather learn how to stay in one." She studied him, uncertain, but moved. "You might regret that." "Then let me regret it beside you." She smiled, the kind of smile that forgives the past without pretending it never hurt. The clock above the counter ticked softly. The world kept spinning, but for that brief moment, the cafe, the rain, the years of distance, all of it folded into stillness. 2 souls no longer broken, but learning again how to lean in. Year later, the sea looked softer. The waves no longer clawed at the cliffs, but rolled against them like a heartbeat. The house above Big Sur stood the same 6 stories of glass and quiet, but the silence inside had changed its shape. It was no longer hollow. It breathed, it lived, it remembered. The once empty mansion was now the headquarters of the Linwood Foundation for Real Lives. The top floor had become an art studio, its walls painted with color instead of dust. The grand piano in the corner sang again, not with grief, but with the laughter of children learning their first notes. Mara stood by the wide window, the morning light spilling through, watching a group of students unpack canvases for their first coastal art retreat. Their laughter rose and fell like the tide. She smiled, adjusting the scarf around her neck, a streak of paint still drying on her hand. Behind her, Elias poured 2 cups of coffee and set one beside her without a word. She turned, smiling. Still making it too strong. "Some habits are worth keeping," he said, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. They stood together for a moment, looking out at the ocean that had once separated them. Now it felt like something that belonged to them both. "You know," Mara said softly, "sometimes I think the house remembers everything we said here, every silence, every storm." "Maybe," he said, "but it also remembers who stayed." Downstairs, a little boy was calling for her. "Miss Mara, can you help me mix this color? I want it to look like the sky." She laughed, her voice warm and easy. "I'll be right there." Elias watched her go. Her footsteps light across the polished floor. He took a slow breath, letting the sound of life fill the spaces that used to echo. On the wall beside him hung a framed photograph, a cracked window glowing gold under the morning sun. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Some cracks let the light in, others let it stay." The old ghosts of the house had finally learned to rest. Lila's portrait still hung in the study, but beside it was a new one, Mara standing with the first graduating class of the Linwood program. The 2 portraits didn't compete, they completed each other. Outside, the children ran toward the cliffs, their shouts carried away by the wind. Elias followed, standing at the edge where the glass terrace met the open air. The Pacific shimmered far below, the same ocean that had once swallowed his grief and given him back a reason to live. Mara joined him, her hand finding his. "They love it here," she said. "So do I," he replied. She looked up at him. "You finally built something that breathes." "We did," he said. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and for a while they said nothing. The gulls drifted overhead, the waves whispered below, and the wind slipped through the cracks in the glass, like a promise that nothing perfect ever lasts, but the real things always stay. "Do you ever miss the silence?" she asked. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but only the kind that listens." She smiled. "You've gotten better at this, you know." "At what?" "Being human." He laughed quietly, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "I had a good teacher." The sun dipped lower, the light spilling gold across the floor, the same color as her eyes when she looked at him that first night in the storm. "Funny," she said, "I came here to clean a house. Now I'm teaching kids how to paint the world." He turned toward her, voice low. "You didn't just clean the house, Mara. You cleaned the dust off a man's soul." She smiled, blinking against the brightness. "That's too poetic for coffee hour." "You inspired it," he said. Below them, one of the children was shouting her name again, waving a brush like a flag. "Miss Mara, look, I made it shine." She laughed, pulling her hand from his. "See, the next generation's already better than us." "That's the point," he said. "They get to start where we stopped breaking." She kissed his cheek before running down the steps, the sound of her laughter echoing off the glass. Elias watched her go, then looked back at the sea. The sun touched the horizon, setting the waves on fire. The house glowed from within, light refracting through every surface, bouncing off every wall, filling the rooms with gold. For the first time since he built it, Elias realized the house no longer felt too big. It felt exactly the size of every soul that had ever found refuge there. He whispered to the sea, to Lila, to Mara, to the echoes that had led him here. Thank you. The wind answered softly through the glass, carrying the smell of salt and paint and life. The house on the cliff no longer kept secrets. It held stories, it held laughter, it held them. And as twilight fell, the foundation lights flickered on below, illuminating the sign at the gate. The Linwood Foundation, where light learns to stay. The house wasn't empty anymore. It was home. If this story reached you somewhere deep, if for a moment you forgot the noise of the world and remembered what it means to feel, then maybe this house, this ocean, and these people were never just fiction. Maybe they were mirrors. Maybe you saw a part of yourself in the silence Elias carried, or in the kindness Mara gave when no one was watching. Maybe you saw the storms you've survived, and the cracks that still let your light through. That's what these stories are for, to remind us that love isn't about perfection or rescue. It's about recognition, about two people standing on the same broken ground and deciding it's worth rebuilding. Somewhere out there, someone is holding their breath through a quiet night, afraid to reach out, afraid to be seen. If that's you, let this be your sign. Open the door. Let someone in. Not because you're weak, but because we're not meant to heal alone. Tell us, where are you watching from tonight? From a small town that smells like rain, from a city that never sleeps, from somewhere in between with your coffee cooling beside you. Drop your country or your state in the comments below. Let's see how far kindness can travel. And if you've ever loved someone but didn't know how to say it, if you've ever stood at the edge of a goodbye, wishing you could start again, share this story with them. Sometimes a story says what the heart can't. For those who believe in quiet strength, in second chances in love that grows from silence instead of chaos, this channel was built for you. Every week we bring you another story like this one, about redemption, about hope, about love finding its way home through the noise. All you have to do is stay, subscribe to Emma's Stories if you haven't yet, and turn on the bell so you never miss the next premiere. These aren't just stories, they're reminders that humanity still beats under all the glass steel and storms of modern life. And before you scroll away, take one small breath and think who in your life made the silence bearable, who helped you remember what it feels like to be seen. Tag them or send them this video. Let them know they mattered, because love that's acknowledged is love that stays. For everyone who's still finding their way through the cracks, remember this: you don't have to be whole to be worthy. You just have to keep the light on. From the cliffs of Big Sur to wherever you are tonight, thank you for watching, for feeling, for believing in stories that heal. This was Emma's Stories. And until next time, keep your heart open, keep your kindness louder than the noise, and never forget, some houses only stop echoing when someone brave enough decides to stay.